all this talk about Kyrie Irving and Carmelo Anthony and the NBA release schedules, and it's just so much going on that I wanted to get a perspective from a guy who's been in the NBA front office. Bobby Marks has 20 years of experience with the New Jersey/Brooklyn Nets. He's now with ESPN. He's their front office insider. I'm glad to have him on the show today. Bobby, how's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So I want to get your perspective first on this Kyrie Irving and Carmelo rumors because, Kyrie gave his list of teams he wanted to go to. Reports are that Carmelo is out there. He only wants to go to the Rockets. And your colleague, Adrian Wojnarowski, was reporting about how, the Cavaliers, they're trying to plan ahead as if LeBron James won't be there. So there's so many things to factor in for possibly trading someone on top of the fact that you got to make the numbers match too. So explain to the audience a bit about how complicated making a trade is for a franchise, especially franchises that are trying to stay or become competitive.
Well, you're kind of looking at two situations with Cleveland. You're a team that's a win-now team with LeBron there, at least for the next year. So if you are looking to move at Kyrie Irving, what pieces can you bring back to try to get you back to another NBA Finals there? But on the other hand, here's a team that, has not built through the draft besides Irving and Tristan Thompson, has moved a lot of first-round picks in the future. Last year was Portland, and going ahead is there's a pick going to Atlanta from the Korver trade, and if LeBron leaves, then you're a team that's probably stuck in the back end of the East here. So you're trying to look at it from both angles here, and that's why when we heard the list of teams, or it was Minnesota or San Antonio, New York, Miami, I just thought those teams were a little bit unrealistic because it didn't really accomplish what Cleveland's goal would be, and to try to get a point guard to kind of keep your head afloat, get a nice young wing there, maybe get a draft asset or two to try to keep you in the pack where you're with Boston, where, if LeBron leaves next year, you also have something to kind of fall back on here. So that is the challenge of trying to move a player like Kyrie Irving, a little bit different than Carmelo because there's a no trade clause here. But for Kyrie, if you are acquiring him, is it, just 2 years from a 2-year rental perspective, or is it going to be, a long-term fit?
Isn't part of the issue with Kyrie also is that you got a short time frame if you're going to move him or you're going to keep him, because the season's not that far away. Training camps are just several weeks away. Then it's the preseason. You have the regular season. So with Kyrie, what is more valuable, you think, for the Cavaliers? Is it not having that distraction throughout the year, or is it trying to get a valuable return for him?
Well, I think it's a little bit easier to, make a deal a little bit in the off season here because you're not in the thick of, you haven't started training camp. The games haven't started yet. It will be interesting if they're not able to get something done. We always kid about, who's the team that's going to have the first team meeting. And I certainly would think Cleveland would be right up there just if he is not moved by by mid-September. You're probably going to need to hash some things out here. But yeah, as the weeks go by, his value, I would think certainly diminishes a little bit here. I always said, that you don't want to put a deadline, but there is certainly an artificial deadline. When you get to the trade deadline, that value is almost like a player going on the last year of his contract. So to maximize the most, I think you've got to look at what is out there. But the other thing is that you don't want to make a bad deal just to make a deal here.
Overlooking the NBA as a whole, I've read your articles about the off season. I've read the article, the projections for the season for the Eastern Conference, and I'm thinking about the Eastern Conference in this way, and that is, it just seems like people are going to say that it's down because it is talent-wise because a lot of guys went west. But the Eastern Conference also seems like in a year in transition because you look at teams like Philadelphia and the Bucks and some of these other franchises. This year may not be their year, but they're not far away from really making that turn. And if LeBron James does leave the Cavs and go out west, you have a massive void that's going to be filled, and it's probably going to be filled by a lot of these young teams.
I know you're right. I mean, I think you look at what Boston was able to do in the offseason. Washington brought back Otto Porter, Toronto with Ibaka and Lowry, and now you've got these young teams. Milwaukee, you mentioned Philadelphia, are kind of waiting in the wings. Miami brought a bunch of their guys back from last year. I know the teams that have been up in the top of the East, Indiana, Atlanta, Chicago, are in a rebuild right now. But no, I mean, I get the argument that the players, the marquee players, have kind of migrated out west. Besides Gordon Hayward coming east. But I look at the East. I mean, I'm fascinated by. I think we know where Cleveland is. I think we have an idea what Boston and Washington, and Toronto. But after that, it is really wide open as far as teams kind of jockey for position. And if LeBron leaves to go out west next summer when he'll be a free agent, then it's really open season as far as what the pecking order is. I would think Boston will still be up there, but it's not like it's been maybe the last couple of years when we thought Cleveland had a direct path right to the NBA Finals.
Speaking of the Sixers, they're here in our backyard. They're a team that's really on the rise. In the ESPN projections, they have them right now tied for 8th in the Eastern Conference with a win increase of 9 wins from 28 to 34. We know they made an 18-game win increase last year. Do you think that going from 28 to 37 for them is a modest projection, or do you think that there's a real potential for them to almost get close or surpass 40 wins, considering how the East has declined talent-wise and also the influx of talent that's coming in for them?
Yeah, I think if things break the right way, and of course, as you know, it all depends on the health of their other main guys with Embiid and getting Ben Simmons back. I think realistically they're probably about a 500 team. I think you're probably looking at 41, 42 wins based on the talent level, the upgrades with Redick and Amir Johnson, a healthy Simmons. If we can get more than 30 plus games from Embiid and where the East is right now, I think. The one thing for them is that, to get into a position where almost like we saw with Utah a couple of years ago, with Denver last year, where you're playing some meaningful games late in March and April, and you're trying to get that experience because this is, let's face it, although they've increased their talent, this is still one of the top 2 or 3 youngest teams in the NBA. And from where this team was, 3 or 4 years ago, to get an 18-game improvement, to hover around 500, which I think they certainly can do this year, would be significant steps. And then you kind of use that as a baseline, as a recruiting tool for next year.
In your ESPN Insider article where you talk about the cheat sheet for the NBA offseason, one of the guys who is rookie extension eligible is Joel Embiid. Considering the injuries, considering the fact he's only played 31 games over the last few years, is he someone that you look at and you would say, I want to get this deal done before the season, or do you let the season play out and then go into negotiations afterwards?
Well, I think I try to get something done, but I think I try to get something done with a compromise with Embiid and with his agent Leon Rose there, where if I'm going to commit top dollar for a player who has played, 31, 32 games in 3 seasons, then I'm going to need to get some protection from an injury perspective, and they can do that where if with the foot maybe long term, if there is an injury this year, that you do have some protection there. So I think that's the course I'm going to go. If I can't get a deal done before October 16th, which is the deadline, then let's get into the season. Let's see if you can put together a healthy season, and then maybe get a deal done in the off season. He'll be restricted, so you'll have the right to match. I think the one guy that's going to be interesting is besides Embiid is that they've got with Robert Covington. There's a November 15th date with him where you can begin renegotiating his contract there. You can also extend it with him. They still have $15 million in cap space. Covington goes into next season as an unrestricted free agent. So if it's not Embiid, can you get a deal done with Covington right now with using that some of that room that you have left to kind of lock him up long term? Because I think if he goes in the open market next summer as an unrestricted free agent, I think there'll be certainly a good market for him out there.
Looking at the Sixers, you list them as having over $15 million in cap space, and one of the things I think is it's not a major concern, but it has to be something that Brian Colangelo needs to consider, which is, we just talked about Embiid's rookie contract. In a couple of years, you're going to have Saric's rookie contract. You're going to have Ben Simmons' rookie contract. You're going to have Fultz. All these guys are going to be coming up to get new deals. And we see what they're doing with the Warriors. The Warriors, they're kind of maneuvering around each other. They're trying to make sure everybody's taken care of. Isn't part of keeping the cap flexibility, not just so for free agency, but so you can re-sign all of these top picks that you have currently on the roster?
No, you're right. I mean, and I think that's kind of where you have a little bit of a window here. You saw it this past summer with the one-year deals with Redick and Amir Johnson, high numbers, but to kind of keep that flexibility that you're not locked in long-term, because that's I guess it's a double-edged sword. If you draft high and the players that you pick produce, then eventually you're going to have to you have to pay them. The players out in Golden State caught a little bit of a break with the Curry contract and Thompson and Green in previous years, coming a little bit below market here. So I think if your goal is to go out and use cap space, I think it's either, it's next summer or the year after. I think if you had hit maybe on that Okafor pick, and he would be coming up soon, then I think I would have been a little more concerned, but that gives you a little bit of a 1 year breather before Simmons comes up, before Fultz comes up. As we mentioned, we talked about Embiid last year, but the one thing you don't want to do is you go out and make some long-term commitments to some free agents and have it not worked out. Then you're going to be, although players are restricted, you're going to have to make some choices here.
Bobby, I appreciate the time today. One more question before I let you go. You were in the Nets front office for 20 years, and I saw your tweet about, you said that the one thing you learned about the schedule, it's about the timing for the back-to-backs, the rest, injuries, travel issues, April games. Give the audience a little bit more perspective because we know how the fans get excited about the specific matchups. The players get excited about the matchups. But how does a front office view the schedule release? Talk about what the front office is doing when that schedule becomes public.
Well, I think it's changed a lot now. I think 2 or 3 years ago, a lot of it was we looked at 4 and 5 nights that are now eliminated, 5 and 7 that they've certainly curtailed, back-to-backs. From a family perspective, I always looked at Christmas, New Year's, Thanksgiving to see when we would be home from that end. But I always did an exercise when I was in Brooklyn, especially when we had some good teams, and I would always kind of put in my head a win total, go through the schedule. But it's so tricky because you never know when you're going to get a team coming off a back-to-back who maybe resting a player here. As I mentioned, what I mean by April games there is that maybe some teams in the last week, you think it's going to be a hard matchup, but they're resting players because they've already got the number 2 or number 3 seed locked up. But from an administrative standpoint, what they're doing right now in those front offices is that you're getting all your travel done, your practices, your charter, you're getting everything done before the season gets going here. So you take the whole season, the 7 or 8 months, you kind of try to get it all done in a week. So, but yeah, I mean, I think you can't really look too far if you're looking from a fan perspective, because, an Oklahoma City team in December could look a lot different than maybe an Oklahoma City team in March.
He is Bobby Marks. I highly recommend you follow him on Twitter at BobbyMarks42. He was in the Nets front office for 20 years. He's the front office insider for ESPN. He was part of the Woj acquisition when ESPN brought Woj. Woj said, what did he say? That Bobby Marks is the add-in piece that must be traded as well. Is that how it worked for you?
Well, I think he compared me to Kristaps Porzingis, but I think that was when Porzingis' name was in those trade rumors. So that's not how he meant it, but I think it maybe it was in a different mindset that he used that.
Well, I mean, being compared to Porzingis is not bad. You're being compared to a unicorn, so.
That is right. Hopefully I can live up to that expectation.
Bobby, I always appreciate the time. Have a good one, and the NBA is only a few weeks away from training camp.
Sounds good. Have a good night.